All right, this week we're going to go over chapter 3, and that is managing the external environment and the organization's culture. We have several objectives for this chapter. We're going to contrast the actions of managers according to the omnipotent and symbolic views. We're going to describe the constraints and challenges facing managers in today's external environment. Develop your skills at scanning the environment so you can anticipate and interpret changes taking place. Discuss the characteristics and importance of organizational culture. Know how to read and assess an organization's culture and describe current issues in organizational culture. All right, so first off, we take a look at our manager and there's two views on what kind of control that manager has, okay? And the first one is the omnipotent view. And that's the view that managers are directly responsible for an organization's success or failure. No matter what happens, that manager is the one who it makes it or breaks it. And then there's a symbolic view, and that is the view that much of the organization's success or failure is due to external forces outside of a manager's control. So, we had a really great boss, but then the pandemic hit and, he couldn't do much to save the company. Um, so those are the views that we have. And in reality, all managers aren't particularly all powerful or helpless. Depending on the external environments, okay? Their decisions and actions are constrained and affected by the external environment, okay? So a really great manager can push you through a very difficult time if they manage it properly. A really bad manager can also break a company in a very good economic time, okay? So they're those managers are pretty powerful, but the external environment also plays a big part on it. So it kind of works together. All right. All right, so there's factors and forces outside the organization that affect its performance. And in the next two slides, we're going to go over the economic and the demographic. But there's also political and legal forces that are going to affect an organization's performance, whatever's going on with the laws of the country, different policies that come out. We can all think of some that kind of changed this summer. There are the sociocultural forces, and that would kind of be the society's, wherever you're at, people's beliefs, maybe religion, their attitudes towards things, just their behaviors, certain trends and traditions that they have and their lifestyles. Then there's also the technological component. And that is kind of any sort of scientific, industrial innovations or things that changed that will affect a company's performance. And then also global forces. Okay, and this is just kind of the everything that encompasses the globalization and things that are going on in the world economy. All right, so going into a little bit more depth on how that economic environment affects managers' ability to manage, and it affects the outside environment. I mean, let's just think about kind of this summer. We're recording this in August of 2022. Hopefully, in a couple years, it's a little bit different. But right now we've got a lot of things going on with the economy, and it really affects how a manager has to manage. You have employees that it costs them more to go to work than it does for them to not work. So their managers are fighting with that. They're fighting with the fact that shipping costs are going to be more. The cost of goods is going up. We're looking at supply chain issues that are still continuing that affect how they have to manage things. Okay, so managers do have to be aware of these things so that they can make the best decisions for their organization. If you have a manager that doesn't understand that inflation went up 9% the last couple of months, if they don't really get that, they're not going to do a good job managing their assets. And then they also have to understand how that affects their employees, and how it's going to affect their businesses and what adjustments they have to make as they're managing. Next is our demographic environment and how this affects how we manage. Okay. So in Blackboard, you guys are going to watch a video that has to do with how to kind of manage and how different generations work differently, how they perform. Um, and how you should manage them. But I will tell you that demographic isn't just about the generation that you're in or the ages that, like the age group that you're in, because you can have two people who are 35 and one has a spouse and several kids and a lot of other things going on, and then you might have someone who's 35 and they're single and they're very committed to their career, and so they're pretty much in a different demographic. One person lives in the suburbs, the other one lives in the city. They're really not of the same demographic, not of the same world. They're gonna, you've got people that more of their income is disposable, whereas people with families have less of their income is disposable. So, managing those groups, just again because they're the same age, doesn't mean that you're going to manage them the same. And understanding that there's definitely a lot of difference to really every single employee that you have. And as you manage more people, you will get better at learning how to manage those different demographics and how you can kind of relate to them. And so, as you kind of grow up in your management skills, make sure you kind of look towards these people that you don't feel very familiar with and take the time to understand kind of what makes them tick, and you'll get better at managing these different demographics. So that external environment definitely affects how managers manage, okay? And back in 2008, 2007, when we saw our last recession, some of these constraints put huge pressure on managers because a lot of companies had to downsize or close down or do different things to where it made a huge impact on employment of their employees. Okay, and a good manager can only do so much when those forces are too great and you can no longer either employ your people or you have to relocate them or have them do for different jobs. It can really affect the organization. Okay. um, and sometimes those jobs, especially what we saw back in 2007, those jobs were eliminated and it's been very slow to bring them back. So that it does affect the workforce that's working for you as well as the people. it we found after 2007 a lot of people had a hard time finding jobs. All right, how do we assess environmental uncertainty? Okay, environmental uncertainty is the degree of change and complexity in an organization's environment. Okay, our change can be stable to dynamic. A very um, stable environment is going to be something where maybe a company or an environment where there's not a lot of competitors to the market, there's not a lot of changes to the economy, there's not a lot of changes to um, technology or how they do things, so they can just kind of be very even keel and just keep going. Not a lot of things are going to be different. A very dynamic environment is where things are constantly changing. New things are coming in. Policies are changing. Departments are opening. We're marketing something new here, and it's that can cause a lot of pressure on managers managing those organizations. Okay, you've got very simple, and then you very complex. Okay, it's much easier to manage in a stable, simple environment than a dynamic and complex environment. And managers don't just have to manage employees, they have a lot of stakeholders that they have to manage relationships with. And these are any constituencies in the organization's environment that are affected by an organization's decisions and actions. And managers of high performing companies tend to consider the interests of all major stakeholders groups as they make a decision. Okay, so let's take a look at who are stakeholders within an organization. So we see there's quite a few, okay? It's not just the employees and the customers, okay? Those are the ones that we think of immediately. We think of the people that work inside and the people that are directly impacted by our product, okay? But we also have lots of people that are really not really rooting for us, but they have a huge stake in whether or not we're successful or how our business goes. Okay, we have our unions that employ that. It's not so big in Texas, but in other states, unions are kind of a really big deal. You have shareholders, people that have invested in the company. You have the communities that we're building in. Okay, so if you ever saw this really great movie from the '90s, it's called Tommy Boy. Tommy goes on the road to save his company because if his company goes under, his plant goes under as well, and the whole town will lose their job. Okay. So a lot of communities are very impacted by the organizations that go in there, and people have jobs there, people are able to raise their kids there, they have stability there, so they want these organizations to succeed. We've got the suppliers. Okay, so your people that sell you, your Cisco, your meats, your cheeses, anybody who's selling you something that you use towards your products. Also the media, the governments, they do make taxes off of us. Trade and industry associations, social and political action groups, and then competitors. Okay, your competitors actually do want you to succeed. They want to make sure that that environment kind of breeds a lot of a lot of times you're going to see, let's say for example, there's always a big group of couple hotels together, a couple restaurants together. They want to make it a central hub for people to go to, right? So if I go over to this restaurant, they're on a wait, I can cross the street, I can go to the other one. Okay, if chances are if one's busy, the rest of them are going to kind of get that overflow, and it's going to be somewhere where people just kind of come to because they know that's where they can eat. So your competitors do want you to they have a stake in whether or not you're successful. They actually don't want you to fail. All right, so benefits of a good stakeholder relationship. Okay, you can have improved predictability of environmental changes. Okay, if I have a really good relationship with my suppliers, they're going to talk about different trends that are coming up. They're going to talk to me about how they're hey, your competitors are going with this quality of product. This might be something that you want to try out. We can see a lot of different things. You're especially with your competitors, you can see things that they research and develop on. So we can gather some information from that. We kind of share, we kind of take a look and see what they're doing. We have increased successful innovations, increased trust among stakeholders, and then greater organizational flexibility to reduce the impact of change. Okay, so the better relationship we have with all these different stakeholders, we are more in front of any changes that are going to come about, and we're in a better place to manage them. All right, so moving into organizational culture, okay? Just like everyone has their own unique personality, organizations typically have their own kind of personality or their culture as well. Our organizational culture is the shared values, principles, traditions, and ways of doing things that influence the way organizational members act and that distinguish the organization from other organizations. So, a lot of times you'll hear, you go work someplace or you're somewhere and they'll say, that's just the way that we do that here. And you can kind of tell, um, you can kind of get a sense of everyone kind of does the same thing, and organization. So with that culture, okay, so the culture is a perception. Okay, it's how people perceive things. The culture is descriptive. It kind of describes how an organization does things. And then the culture is shared. So typically you can tell when you have somebody within the organization that isn't really on board with the culture. They're kind of stick out like a sore thumb. um, and it kind of makes it to where that culture, you either fit in or it's just a place where you work. All right, so we have different dimensions of organizational culture. Okay, so the first one is the stability, and that's kind of how a company, do they make a lot of changes? Do they do things on the fly, or are they very methodical in doing in how they do things or how they move forward with their goals? Are they innovative and they do it? Do they encourage risk taking? Do they have very high attention to detail? Do they have an outcome orientation? Are they really focused on the process or the bottom line? Do they like their people? That's Some companies are very into their employees, and some of them are more into getting that job done. Do they have a team orientation, or are they looking for everyone to kind of work independently? And then are they aggressive and competitive, or are they more nurturing? So looking at two different company cultures, okay? So you've got two different organizations. And one is not necessarily better to work for than the other one. Okay, organization A, risk taking and change is discouraged, creativity is discouraged, close managerial supervision, and work is designed around individual employees. Okay, so I would consider that would probably be something like a processing plant, maybe like an assembly line. Okay, you can't, if you're working for Ford Motor Company and you are putting on brake pads, you don't get to really be creative in how you do it. Okay. You have to do it the same way every single time. And there's a lot on the line. So they probably have managers that are very closely monitoring you and managing you to make sure that that's done correctly. Because, if brake pads aren't put on correctly, then there's recalls and people can die. Then you've got organization B. Risk taking and change is rewarded. Creativity and innovation is rewarded. Management trusts its employees, and the work is designed around teams. Okay, so this would be an example of a different culture. Maybe something like Southwest Airlines, where they are looking for you. One, if you're a flight attendant, you got to work as a team. They look for you to creatively solve problems as you work with different individuals and your customers and people that are flying with you. And they do encourage creativity. Okay. So, not one of these is not necessarily better than the other. Now, for sure, one is probably better for you than the other. If you like to do the same thing every single day, if you like to be managed, which some people really, really do, then organization A is the place for you to work. And organization B would be the place for you to work if you do want to be creative, if you do want to do different things every single day, if you do want to work with a team. Okay. So when you get jobs or when you're looking for a company to start your career with, look at these cultures, um, because you don't necessarily fit in everywhere. Look and see what kind of personality lines up with your values and what you want out of your career and your life, and make those decisions when you're interviewing with those companies. So a strong culture is something that a strong culture is an organization's high commitment to their values. Okay. A strong culture is very evident from the time that you start there. You don't have to work somewhere for 6 months and kind of figure out, mm, how strong is this culture here? You should know from the very, very beginning. And most of the time it's very evident in orientations. Okay. The stronger a culture becomes, the more effect that it has on the way a manager plans, they organize, they lead and control. Okay. So if you work somewhere that's very creative, if you're working somewhere where it's very team oriented, where we inspire playfulness at work, the the minute you go into orientation, you will probably see a lot of team building activities. You're probably going to see lots of creative, kind of colorful ways to onboard you. It's not just a packet that you have to fill out, but maybe there's a process, and almost like a fish camp that you have to go through. And so this culture really affects how you manage people. If you're rolling out new information for people, it's going to be a little bit more fun. Maybe that meeting has has games associated with it or whatnot. But if you're more of a rigid culture, um, maybe the onboarding is just a little bit different. And where do we get our culture from? All right. The original source of culture, it typically reflects the vision of the founders and those leaders in charge and how they've developed the country and the organization. Okay. And then once that culture is in place, the the practices within the organization again help to maintain that. And then the actions of the top managers also have major impact on the organization's culture. So if you have a manager that If you have a manager that does not follow the core values of the organization, um, that can really affect the employees and kind of their trust with them and the culture and the job satisfaction of the employees that you have. You guys will see in the video, the smartest guys in the room really focus on the employee culture and how that affected how they made decisions within the organization and how it ultimately led to their downfall. All right, so how do we employees learn culture? Okay, if you ever watched The Office, there's an episode, or maybe I think maybe a couple, where they go to this restaurant and they give awards to everybody, and it's the Dundies. Okay, and so that would be an example of how they keep that culture going. Okay, so employees learn culture from stories. We hear stories about how someone started the organization. We hear stories about how what managers used to do, how things were before, and how it kind of affects us now. We have different rituals. Okay, so again, very good examples with an onboarding, or how they reward people, how they acknowledge longevity within the company. You're going to have artifacts and symbols, and then just the different language that you speak within the company. There's typically, when I worked for Pappas, we always said time to lean is time to clean. And that was something that everybody said because Harris Pappas said it as well. All right, so culture again affects the managers in how they plan. Okay, the degree of risk that plans should contain. Okay, whether or not a plan should be developed by, if we're looking at individuals or teams. Um, how much we need to worry about the outside environment when we're making these plans. All right. What when we talk about leading, what leadership styles are appropriate? Okay. How are we micromanaging? Are we kind of stepping back? Are we letting our teams manage ourselves? When we look at organizing, that's the degree in which, managers interact with each other. Also, how much can we design into someone's job for them to do? And then we control, like how do we control employees that maybe aren't up to our standards? How do we change things? How do we let somebody go? Okay, that is a big part of the culture. Okay, um, when you do have to let someone go, or you do have to fire someone, you always want to make sure that no matter what, you could shake hands at the end of that termination. And company culture, again, really does affect that. How do we create an innovative culture? All right. So, with your employees, challenge them and be involved with them. Challenge them to help you make decisions. A lot of times, the decisions that they make, they're going to be much more on board with. And some of your greatest ideas are going to come from some of your employees. Okay. They're going to be much more bought into the company and the culture if they're more involved. Giving them the freedom to, um, do their best, make mistakes as necessary and learn from them. Nobody really comes to work and says, "I want to suck today." So most of your employees are going to have your organization's best interest in mind when they work, and so a little bit of freedom does help them do their job a little bit better. Definitely trust them and be open with them. Encourage idea time, and then playfulness and humor. Okay, schedule and allow time for employees to interact, and employees to kind of have fun at work. If we can schedule a little bit of time, if you schedule coffee time or break time or something like that, then it really resets your employees and gets them back on schedule, and a lot of times will make them more proactive and more productive than if they just kind of do it on their own. Encourage conflict resolution. Okay, a little bit of conflict is good, a lot is not. Encourage debates, because that is a good way to get ideas out and really form some good ideas. And then do encourage risk taking as well. All right, so for the rest of this chapter, you should be watching our movie and doing the assignment on that, as well as watching our video on the different generations. If you have any questions, please drop me an email and I will see you next time.